Hi everyone, this is Lamia Dawood, doctor student, Indiana University of Pennsylvania. In this video, we'll be talking about Restoring the Family Assets, which is an article that talks about the US welfare system established by the 1935 Social Security Act. It came under open attack in the 1980s and the 1990s. The retrenchment of the aid to families with dependent children, which is the AFDC, the old age pension, and the unemployment insurance program beginning in the 1980s marked the end of the post-World War II expansion of the US welfare state. There were subsequent attacks during the 1990s on all the entitlement programs and on the role of the federal government in social welfare. This was part of the economic recovery strategy designed to restore both capitalism and patriarchy. Let me share my screen with you. So in 1980s, the strategy called for redistributing income upward, shifting the cost of labor, shrinking social welfare programs, weakening the political influence of popular movement. It was called supply-side economics or deficit reduction. It emerged after international competition, cheap foreign labor, the loss of the US dominance in the world economy. So there were pressures on leaders to lower the cost of production. So they tried to downsize corporation, export production to low-wage countries, hold down the minimum wage, increase the supply of low-cost worker, limit the enforcement of labor, anti-discrimination, and environmental regulations. As welfare benefits provided an alternative to the market wage, any plan to push wages down had to include reducing the value of social benefits so that stagnated paychecks would not cause workers to choose government assistance over low-paid market work. Same time, corporate leaders had supported social welfare spending because the resulting cash assistance, education training, and social services program increased consumer purchasing power, created healthy, educated, and properly socialized workers, and more importantly, promoted political stability. However, changes in the domestic and global economies led business and government to denounce the welfare state for interfering with private investment and for providing workers with an alternative wage, which increased their leverage at the workplace. So by the 1980s, business and government no longer desired to meet these continued demands. Instead, they disinvested in social welfare and acted to weaken the influence of organized labor, civil rights, and women groups who might object to these changes. So the goal was to restore traditional gender roles and the family ethics. The declining marriage rate, combined with more single motherhood, non-marital births, gay and lesbian parenting, produced a kind of hysteria about the need to restore family values. This is why President Reagan assigned the White House Working Group on the Family, which they have maintained that the expansion of welfare state forced traditional American family to cede too much of its authority to courts and public officials. So they hope that shrinking social welfare benefits would help to restore the two-parent, male-headed heterosexual family. AFDC, for their opponents, believe that programs help poor women avoid both low-paid jobs and unhappy or unsafe marriages, and to consider social welfare benefits as a right. AFDC is connected to work ethics. As you know, that the original goal of AFDC was to provide for the care of children by enabling their mothers to remain at home. But actually, the program has always contained an explicit work ethic for the women it served. So AFDC program statistics showed that many women on welfare already worked, actively sought a job, or became enrolled in an educational or training program. However, for poor women with limited education, they faced greater competition, especially from more skilled people, and because of downsizing and international competition, which all made have pressure to lay off workers. Also, they didn't have access to childcare and to health insurance coverage. AFDC also is connected to the family asset. Welfare reform sought to restore the family asset, but the expansion of AFDC, especially the integration of more and more never married women into the caseload, helped to legitimize single motherhood instead of upholding the family asset. It enabled mothers to raise children without the help of a father or a job. For this, conservatives blame the AFDC for changing family structure and for ignoring the wider social reason why women might not be able to marry or reject the nuclear family model. So there were pressures for reform. This is why the Reagan administration resorted to cutbacks, and we'll talk about cutbacks in details. So the cutbacks enforced more than one initiatives. One of them is the OPRA of the 1981, which retrenched AFDC and many other social programs for the poor. The other one is the Family Support Act of the 1988, which used government dollars to leverage change in work behavior of poor women in welfare. Also in 1990s, the welfare reform sought to modify the marital childbearing, child-rearing, and work choices of AFDC mothers. The two last initiatives symbolized by the Contract of America aimed at destroying the idea of entitlement to social benefits and to delegitimize the entire welfare state. The first cutback is the OPRA of the 1981, which made it difficult for women to qualify for AFDC benefits, as it limited eligibility to families with a gross income of 150% of a state need standard. It also restricted AFDC to the last trimester of a first pregnancy and denied aid to families of strikers. OPRA replaced AFDC work incentives with more coercive work requirements and introduced stricter work rules for AFDC mothers. This has, of course, resulted in a saving of $1.1 billion in 1983, but it made more women and children more weak and more poor. The other cutback is the 1988 Family Support Act. The Reagan administration, as you know, with the OPRA had made straightforward and budget cuts, but the welfare reform called for more coercive programs that modified the work behavior of poor women. So it actually finalized the transformation of AFDC from a program that helped single mothers to stay home with their children into a mandatory work program. Also, the welfare reform in the 1990s, it made it more severe and actually punished single mothers by having what is called the family cap, which denied AFDC forever to children born with their mothers, born while their mothers are receiving AFDC, and to unmarried teen mothers and their children. So if women insist on becoming pregnant, they should turn to relatives, apply for charity, or place their children in orphanages. So actually, this reform stiffened the paternity penalties and it withhold benefits from mothers who refuse to provide information that would identify the child's father. It also has a legitimacy bonus, which is an extra federal money for states that lower their non-marital birth rate without increasing the number of abortions. So Clinton welfare reform received lots of criticism, as it encouraged the states to develop programs that controlled women's reproductive choice without waiting for federal welfare reform. So the condition of aid takes advantage of women's financial situation, leaving women with little choice but to trade their health and religious preference for the AFDC check. It also strips women of their privacy and mandates medical intervention that may be unwanted. It presumes that poor women lack the capacity to make their own reproductive decision. It also displays deep distrust of parenting by poor women. And even though many of the reformers hire poor women to care for their own children. The Social Security retirement program has a different view. So, as more women went to work outside the home and as divorce became more widespread, these trends actually help to weaken the ability of the old age pension program to uphold the family assets. So instead of excluding women from coverage, aiding them as dependent of men, and penalizing them for becoming employed, the Social Security retirement program of the 1980s began to show signs of favoring working women over homemakers and unmarried women over wives. And as working women started to retire, they began to receive benefits on their own work record rather than as dependent, and the number of women entitled to their husband's record also increased. So this program rewarded women for their independence. So although this program was rewarding and encouraging women and not penalizing them for being employed, but the benefits were solely based on workers' wages during employment. So some of the lowest paid workers received no benefits at all. Beginning in 1980s, the OPRA phased in reduction for future retirees through a variety of highly technical changes that made in the calculation of future benefits. So the Reagan administration, whose long-range goals included transforming Social Security from an entitlement program serving all the elderly to a welfare program just for the elderly poor, argued that the truly needed would not suffer because they still could apply for SSI. However, before the cuts, 50% of potential recipients chose not to apply for SSI, often because of the program's stigma as welfare. The Social Security cuts also worsened the widow's gap by ceasing payment to mothers or fathers when their children reached the age of 16 instead of 18. And the issue of solvency of the Social Security Trust Fund also contained other benefit reduction harmful for women. So, like the postponement of the retirement age from 65 to 67 and the dropping benefits uh, of payment for early retirees from 80 to 70% of the full benefit uh, amount. The 1983 amendment benefit actually in the 19th amendment, it did improve social security reform programs for women in a few ways, as it expanded the social security tax base. It changed the wage calculation to reflect more recent pay rates. It enhanced the ability of some divorced women with living husbands to collect their retirement benefits, and benefits became available to divorced women without having to wait until their ex-husband retired. As for the unemployment insurance, the Reagan administration was distinguished by the absence of attention to issues of concern to women. Actually, women, persons of color, the poor, were adversely affected by the efforts to lower the cost, to increase work incentive, and to privatize the unemployment insurance system. So in the 1990s, the unemployment insurance covered more people than ever. This is true. But the number of eligible unemployed persons who actually received benefits dropped off. Because despite high employment rates, Congress changed the employment insurance program in ways that encouraged the state to deny benefits to jobless workers. How? The government began to charge interest of up to 10% on federal loans to fiscally strapped states. The Congress discouraged workers from using the program by subjecting more of their unemployment insurance check to federal income taxes. OPRA also made changes that significantly reduced extended benefits, and the legislature raised the unemployment rate that triggered extended benefits in the individual states from 4 to 5%, and it eliminated the lower national trigger, which would have activated extended benefits in all states. It also mandated recipients to have worked for 20 weeks in the base period to be eligible for them. As for the welfare state hiring practices, it also helped to undermine the regulatory role. So instead of channeling middle class and married women into the home, the government, on demand for labor and implementation of affirmative action policies, drew many white women and women of color, including many wives, into public sector employment. So by the 1986, the government employed more women than men, and the large number of female professionals at work in government agency or federally subsidized program contributed to the new conservative critique of human service workers as a new class of employees selfishly benefiting from the expansion of the welfare state. The social program cuts and the attacks on affirmative action rules cost many women their jobs, and the employment cuts continued through the decade into the 1990s. The federal government also saved money by slowing down the rate of wage increases, as Reagan recommended a wage freeze for all federal employees other than postal and military workers. In order to conclude all that, so despite many references to strengthening family life and preserving traditional family values, Presidents Reagan, Bush, Clinton have made few, if any, affirmative proposals to help families. The cutbacks help to revive the system old patterns and rewards through tightening public assistance eligibility, imposing time limits, intensifying workfare requirements, recreated the practice of punishing single mothers, increasing the flow of women into the service sector, and exerting the desired downward pressure on wages. So the attack on welfare blamed poor women in order to deflect the attention of the increasingly economic insecure middle class from the structural sources of the national source economic and political was. When Social Security began to benefit women on their own work record, and as the program showed signs of rewarding women economic independence, it was the cutbacks that we talked about. When more than 50% of all women worked outside the home, unemployment was severely retrenched. The domestic program cuts reversed the employment gains made by women employed in the public sector. These changes channeled women viewed as deviating from prescribed women and mother role into low-paid employment and encouraging those who complied with these rules to remain at home, where they produced the labor force and maintained the non-working poor. Hope this was helpful and hope you liked my video.